This is the Tree of Life, Season 27, Chapter 5. In this episode, we will be talking about the modeling system of the simulation and bringing together our discussion of the dialectical degeneration with consensus shifts. The dialectical degeneration is the internal process by which impulses are categorized, generalized, and shifted into existing historical movements or categorizations to return individuals to predictable patterns described by consensus. In Season 25, Chapter 9, we talked about a two-step dialectical degeneration and gave an example of three sequential thoughts. In this example, an individual was driving down a road past a city where there was a great deal of poverty. He was reminded of a conversation with a friend the night before, where he described that poverty as intergenerational poverty. Passing by that city, he is reminded of that conversation. He again thinks intergenerational poverty. The next thought sequentially is all poverty is intergenerational, and the final thought is, it doesn't have to be. Now, it was discussed in a previous episode how these steps in dialectical degeneration are assumed by individuals within networked hierarchies. But each thought can also be assigned a domain, thus corresponding to a particular hierarchy. The first thought is a personal observation within the work domain. The next thought, all poverty is intergenerational, is a generalization within the work domain. The third thought, it doesn't have to be steps into the civil society domain, because it has implications for how civil society is structured prospectively in light of historical movements of politics. It is suppositional, because it is prospective. If you notice, the third thought also falls into existing categorizations, because it calls into the discussion political movements, and specifically how resources can be allocated within society. This two-step dialectical degeneration is followed by acquiescence within an existing categorization, such as socialism or communism, which sees the redistribution of resources to address underlying concerns about equitable distribution of wealth. That is, the dialectical degeneration sees the movement of archetypal language from the work domain to the civil society domain, the assumption of those constituent steps by networked hierarchies, and provides an input for which consensus has readily available ideological categorizations to address what is an underlying personal observation prospectively. Now, in statistics and mathematics, the mean square error is a tool which describes the average squared difference between the estimated values and the actual value. Every shift in consensus is prompted by some mean squared error, which describes the accuracy of the pre-event consensus in predicting any individual's internal state. Dialectical degeneration describes the mechanism by which the estimator, being consensus, shifts to respond to any error in the predictability of consensus of an individual's internal states. We also explained how when there are more than two steps to consensus represented by an internal impulse, it leads to infinite recursion, which produces a shift in consensus, that is, in digital objects within some domain. Dialectical degeneration crosses domains before it becomes infinite recursion. Thus, in our example of two-step degeneration, we see the movement of a personal observation to a bipolar ideological divide. This means that you can prime the system before producing a consensus shift. Mean square error is a measure of the distance from consensus represented by any individual impulse or thought, but consensus shifts center around conflicts over what is true within certain domains. Each step in degeneration represents the assumption or agreement of a constituent or downstream thought by a networked hierarchy within a domain. Degeneration is thus the manner by which error in prediction becomes consensus through a breaking down an impulse into constituent parts in a process of generalization and projection. Finally, we can see that the assumption of these constituent impulses by networked members within certain domains occurs only when the degeneration is complete, through the acquiescence at the conclusion of the substitution event. This acquiescence will fit the impulse back into an existing historical categorization represented by the reorganization of digital media. It can also be seen that as part of this degeneration, there will be the compelling of acquiescence within some domain to terminate the recursion. That's the end of the podcast for today.